And hello, and you're very welcome along to another episode of the RTÉ Rugby podcast as we're knee deep in the Autumn International Series. Ireland 1916 winners against South Africa at the weekend. Fiji coming up this Saturday at the Aviva Stadium, and also Munster against South Africa A down in Musgrave Park, Páirc Uí Chaoimh, most importantly, on Thursday evening. Bernard Jackman with us, and Donal Lenihan's back as well. Donal, first pod of the new year.
Great to
You're a
be
bit like
back.
Hugo Keenan. We're throwing you straight into the international mix.
Exactly.
You have a full show in you?
No warm-ups or anything, but I'm ready to go. No bother. I needed inspiration. I got it in the Aviva last Saturday.
And speaking of, I mentioned Páirc Uí Chaoimh there. I'll be heading down to it tomorrow evening. We'll talk about the match a little bit later on. What time should I be leaving to avoid the dreaded Cork traffic? Is sometime this evening preferable, is it?
No, early in the morning. The tunnel will be our biggest problem, but don't worry, sure. Everyone at the match is from Cork, so it doesn't matter. They'll be down there early.
Good stuff. I'm looking forward to it anyway, but we'll chat a bit more about it later on because we're going to get straight in with Ireland, South Africa at the weekend. And Birch, we've had a few days to digest it all now. How many times at this stage have you rewatched it? My social media feed has just been full of you throwing up small little clips and screen grabs from it over the last few days. Putting on 5-6 rewatches now.
No, in fairness, I watched it live and I was like, geez, this is savage. This is the most physical game I've seen. And it was really going to be a case of who could just stay going, would win it. And then I went home and watched it and confirmed it. And then I just did a quick look over the third time just to pick out some clips. But I thought it was fascinating. And I was speaking to some people at halftime and they were like, oh, it's a crap match. And I was like, geez, I actually don't. And I know 6-6 doesn't sound exciting, but I thought it was enthralling. I thought it was enthralling in terms of how cagey it was, a game of cat and mouse, how physical it was, how both teams defended under 22 when they needed to. And I always hoped it would open up a little bit, and it did. And obviously then, we got the score. I thought it was important we didn't let them get away from us. And then we got the lead because obviously with the bomb squad coming on, they tend to finish strong. So, yeah, it was a great test match. I mean, the URC's been really good this year, to be fair, but for me, that was another level, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And like you said, the physicality obviously jumped out straight away. But was there anything when you watched it the second time, or when you went back and were picking out a couple of clips on the third go, that were there any things that kind of caught you that you didn't really spot the first time round?
No, well, I loved Ireland's attempt to break down that rush, and it didn't always go perfectly. I mean, Sexton was annoyed with himself for two passes that stayed in the air too long. The one actually that Mac Hansen ends up getting driven into the ground. I mean, if that sits down a little bit quicker, there's more on. I mean, what the Boks do is they get incredibly narrow, so they come flying in, but then they have this unbelievable scramble behind it. So it's actually very difficult to make serious yards unless that pass gets up over the rush and down very quickly. And that's not easy. I do think, to be fair, that getting a taste of it at URC level has helped all of us. I think if we had gone into that match cold, 5 years since played the Springboks, having not played the Sharks, the Stormers, and the Bulls, even though it's not the same level of quality, it's different than how we had played normally in the URC. So I think that was a help to us. I thought we were tactically very smart. I thought we defended incredibly well. Paul O'Connell, and John Fogarty as in terms of set piece. I mean, that was the area, and that's the area that Razzie would be absolutely furious with, because they thought they would dominate us and they didn't get any change out of us. And the commitment from the players, the way they were organised to stop that maul, was really impressive. Look, we've got very good coaches, and and they're two Irish lads, O'Connell and Fogarty, who are starting to make a real name for themselves, I think, in international rugby coaching.
Yeah, and Donal, I think that was that arguably the winning and losing of the game, like the way Ireland just handled that South African maul, and as much as South Africa probably won the majority of the individual collisions around the pitch, it was in the real tight stuff, the maul and the scrum as well in the second half, where Ireland not just held their own, but actually had control of it.
Yeah, look, I think the beauty from a coaching perspective of playing against South Africa is you know exactly what's coming against you. So therefore, in terms of your preparation, you know exactly what you have to do. Just before getting into the specifics, I agree with Páirc in terms of the quality of the match. I thought first half, as he said, it was cat and mouse, but it was real test rugby. I thought the crowd were a bit flat, to be honest with you. If I have a criticism, I'd say that bloody Egypt and the Tannoy, that drives me bananas. Aviva, we don't need fellas putting on music when there's somebody down injured. We've got to engage the crowd. I thought that was awful, I have to say, and I hope we get rid of it. But you go back to the specifics of the game. I was at a pre-match lunch. I couldn't believe there was about 400 people there, but I'd say 200 and 300 were from South Africa. There was a massive South African presence. And to be fair, 50%, I was inquiring, had travelled up from South Africa. The others, obviously, huge South African base in London, but also here in Ireland. So from that point of view, I thought it had the whole lead and, walking down to the Aviva, going past Ball's Bridge, you get that buzz that you don't often get in autumn internationals, because obviously there's very few of the away supporters there. But South Africa definitely bring that. Onto the specifics of the game, the maul was always going to be the key tenet. And in fact, the first maul of the game, first line-up maul, I think was about 4 or 5 minutes in, and Ireland were penalised off it. So you felt, oh God, here we go. But, the way they adapted, there was 3 or 4 in a row where they just stopped South Africa getting any momentum. I thought the way they handled it in terms of the variety, and, you talk about players making decisions on the field. There were times when we kept our troops on the ground. There was times when we looked to compete in the air. The one just before half time, a 5-metre attacking lineup from South Africa's perspective, when James Ryan decided to get up and compete, that was only 5 metres out. It's very unusual that you leave the ground unless you're reasonably confident. Now, I don't know whether he picked up some triggers or whether he kind of interpreted what the South African calls were, but he gambled that it was going to Etzebeth at the front. He got a hand in, we scrambled it, and that was massive. In the context of getting to half-time without conceding an inch in that area was huge. And then to flip it within 5 or 6 minutes of the restart and get a maul try of our own, now you're really getting into the heart of the Springboks. You're hitting them in an area where they'd expected to dominate you. And their maul defence has been quite good all year. So now, to be fair to Van der Fleer, how he managed to navigate his way without being thrown into touch, because, when you throw short, when you throw to the front of the line-out, the opposition would always try and just manipulate you over the touchline. Look, he's an outstanding player. He's had an outstanding season, but that is in the minutiae of, to have the awareness, to know where the try line is, to get his body so low, to keep his feet from not hitting the touchline was incredible. So, that for me was probably the moment of the game, because you hit them where it hurt most. And in the end, the last quarter, we actually forced them to play a bit of rugby.
Yeah.
And it does beg the question. These South Africans can play. And look, we could talk about the 10 debate and Willems and all that type of thing, but they can play. And you wonder why they don't rely on that more often. I think they had a better mix to their game early on. The first outing against New Zealand in Ellis Park, I think it was. They played a fantastic mix of rugby and beat New Zealand well. I'm a bit surprised. Maybe come World Cup time, that's something we'll need to be aware of. But look, psychologically, to go toe-to-toe with them up front and to come out better was huge. And, what significance does it have for the World Cup match? Very little, really. But I think, the fact that the Irish forwards were so, I thought, outstanding on the day, that was the big plus for me.
And Bert, to go back on the James Ryan line-out steal that Donal was talking about there just before half-time, it's a huge moment if you think about it, because for the majority of the lineouts in that opening half, they weren't competing. They were leaving South Africa have it, and they were getting themselves set to try and sack them, get them all, get them down early before the maul was set, or to stop the maul. But it took a lot of guts and a lot of balls to try and go for that steal. 2-3 minutes before halftime, 5 meters out from your own try line, because if South Africa win clean ball there and get their maul set, it's going to be next to impossible to stop at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's testament to him, having the guts to make that call. But also, I go back to O'Connell. I mean, he's obviously given him, clear parameters around what they can do and what they should do. And I think the fact the box through to the front, he came kind of from behind and just got a hand, and there wasn't, and that was a brilliant moment in the chemo area, and he had an unbelievable fight to get back over the goal line. I mean, for them to get a scrum from there, a 5-yard scrum would have put pressure on us again. So, like, it's incredible that over 80 minutes, it's that turnover from Ryan, it's Furlong getting back over. For me, he was important, even though he was injured, because he got a couple of big hits. And allowed us exit. Jimmy O'Brien was able to get a good clearance because we had a left footer on the field. And then that Van der Fleer try, I've never seen someone do that. I thought we'd blown our chance, to be honest. And it was only, obviously, TMO was able to pick it up clearly. But normally when a team is getting hooshed into touch like that, the ball dies with them. And it was just a moment of real composure and ability to keep his body height down and kind of fight against where the weight was coming from, was massive. But I think O'Connell and Fogarty as well, from a scrum point of view, like we made it difficult. We didn't always scrummage perfectly legally. We changed our tactics, frequently during the game at scrum point of view. And from a lineup point of view, there was an example where the box would have expected no one goes up in the air against the box 5 yards out, to be honest. You know what I mean? So if you look at the throw, it was slightly undercooked because, there's no need to throw double tops because, normally it's a free jump there. And Ryan, as I said, come in from behind and it just was a nuisance. And I thought he had an unbelievable game. We're talking about Joe McCarthy, we're talking about the Jason Jenkins type player, and as a tight head lock. But I thought James Ryan, he mightn't be physically as big as Estebet or Ludi Jager, etc. But I thought he had an unbelievable productive game, and he's back towards his best. He had quietened down a little bit, I thought, but that's the James Ryan of old, in my opinion. And Donal's obviously a specialist in that, but I'd love your opinion on Donal.
Yeah, look, I think by his own admission, he wasn't at the level that he had been over the past few years. And, he came out, I think, prior to this game and said, look, the concussions that he had, it did sort of impact on his confidence. Yeah. But to be fair, I go back, I was in New Zealand, Birch, for the 3-test series, as you know. He was quiet in the first test, but he hadn't played games for a long period of time coming into that. I thought in the second and third test in New Zealand, he was really back to his best. It was the James Ryan that we saw in 2018. And I think he's, I think he's been, people have kind of now developed this narrative around him. I think he came on as a sub in one of the Leinster games, and Jason Jenkins had a big game, and the Stormers came back into the game, and everyone was saying, "Oh, Jesus, Jenkins is a huge loss, and Ryan is a dub," which was rubbish, really. But I thought when you're playing against the very best pack in the world, I agree with you. I thought it was outstanding on Saturday. You could see when he got annoyed, he got a bang on the head in one of the games recently and reacted. Was it against Munster, I think?
Rightly so. Kenya Knox.
Yeah, Kenya Knox. And people said, oh, geez, I heard people giving out about Ryan. Listen, if you taken the number of bangs that he had to the head, I'd be annoyed if you felt somebody was targeting you. So, and it's good to see that age in him. I think that scrum cap, to be honest, it doesn't do a whole lot for him. I mean, he's a kind of an angelical looking fella at the best of times. But look, it doesn't matter. You've got to perform. And I thought he was outstanding. In fact, Tyke Byrne, by his high levels, I thought, wasn't quite at the same level as Ryan on the day. But again, I mean, it amazes me how some of these players with little or no game time can get in, and it shows you the level of what they're doing in training and the way they're managed by their S&C people, that they can go in and play a test of that intensity, with some of them with one game or two game, and others like Hugo Keenan with no game. It's phenomenal, really.
Yeah, we were chatting to Hugo Keenan afterwards, and in fairness, he admitted he was absolutely floored after that match. But he didn't look it out on the pitch, and although, as Andy Farrell said about him last week, that he's a freak athlete in general, that he is, like, straight away, he is the fittest player on the team, no questions about it. I might move on, guys, to the squad depth, because I think this was a big part, not just of the South Africa game, but something we want to kind of see a lot of over the next few weeks and into the Six Nations as well, with the World Cup looming. So first up, you got no Bundy Aki, no Robbie Henshaw. Stuart McCloskey finally gets his chance and is probably playing the best game of his Irish career after 28 minutes when he gets an injury. and in comes Jimmy O'Brien for a debut into the centre, where I think most of us would probably associate him with being a wing or a full back, and Bernard seemed to just fit in absolutely seamlessly.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant, and he did his case for World Cup inclusion. A lot of good, because he is that utility player. He is that left footer, and he looked really composed. It was interesting. About 4 years ago, I Easton Siva, before he went home, I asked him, who's the one to watch? And Jimmy O'Brien is a Newbridge past pupil, but which is my old school. But I didn't really know a huge amount about him, and he said, Jimmy O'Brien. And I've been kind of keeping an eye on him. And in fairness, it's only really in the last 12 months that he's got that regular game time, and he's looked, looked at home, and he started to get Europe Champions Cup games for Leinster. Which, if you get Champions Cup games for Leinster, on a reasonably regular basis, it means you're impressing Leo and Stuart and you're a potential international. But to come on, in that game, with the game the way it was, and have to play a big role, I think was testament to his temperament, because he's very talented for sure, and a really good debut for him. And then obviously I also want to mention Finney Bealham. I mean, I've been kind of crossing my fingers that Tyke Furlong would get 60 minutes, 65 minutes, and probably harshly, really, because when you watch Finney Bealham play for Connacht, when he's in the Connacht scrum, it's generally more than adequate, or more than competitive, and Ireland trust him, and I just thought he got through 40 massive minutes as well, both at set piece, but also around the field. Obviously McCluskey looked good when he was on. Look at Balakoon gets a big game, and we've all been clamoring for him to get some opportunities. So while obviously the elephant in the room was Friday night, I think in terms of depth, in terms of what we saw in New Zealand, in terms of the fellas we just mentioned, Keller had to come back in, etc. Into the squad. I think we're starting to build enough depth. We need to have 35. We don't need to have 50. I don't think at this stage.
Yeah, like
it's and I think that, sorry, just following up on that and the Jimmy O'Brien scenario. I mean, I almost take, if you want to create a narrative for Ireland this autumn, I think Andy Farrell sort of touched on something in one of his press conferences. He's talking about no excuses. He's trying to develop this no excuse culture. So therefore, whatever happens, we get on with it. And when you had all this sort of trauma at the start of the New Zealand tour, I remember I was staying in the same hotel in the first week in New Zealand, and you had players going down with COVID, you had players going down injured, and others were starting. Players were slightly beginning to drop their heads, and this is brilliant. I remember talking to Johnny Sexton about this, and he said, Jesus, we were getting worried. Mac Hansen had COVID, others were getting injured. You had the scenario where Michael Bent had to be drafted in, but Farrell was bouncing, because this is exactly the point he was making, Les. This is what can happen on the morning of a World Cup quarter-final, and therefore we have to be able to learn to adapt. So therefore, you look at the Jimmy O'Brien scenario. He's in the squad to play against New Zealand on the Friday. He is then all of a sudden he's parachuted in. He's handed the number 23 shirt later on Friday evening. He's watching the A match on the telly, or he could have been in the RDS for all I know. But if he thought he was coming on, and bear in mind he was uncapped, so he hasn't played at this level. So he comes in now after 27 minutes. He comes in for a fella in McCluskey who's played out of his skin, as you rightly said, in that opening 27-minute period. We've always spoken, going back to Brian O'Driscoll's time, about the 13 being the most difficult area of the field to defend. You have a lot of decisions to make. Do you drift? Do you come in? Your communication with your inside centre. And we always talk about that midfield pairing. I mean, the Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose have been outstanding, and unsurprisingly, because they play together so often. So he's parachuted in, out of position, and he's outstanding. And you go back to New Zealand. Remember the first night in Hamilton. It was a really wet, dirty night, and he had a bit of his kicking game was kind of out of shape, and he didn't get a chance really in the match day squad out there. So I would have said he'd have come back from New Zealand slightly disappointed. This is the first game since New Zealand, and now because of the versatility that Birch is talking about. He must be nailed on to go to France next year. And all you can do is step up to the mark when you're thrown in at the deep end, and that's exactly what he did. And I think that and the Beelum one, we saw Páirc Furlong he went down injured right in front of our position up in the commentary area. You saw him hobbling. He just about survived those scrums before half time. He hobbled down the touch, and you were talking at half time about the loss of Furlong. I think Beelum actually got penalised in the first scrum at the start of the second half. But from there on in, he was absolutely outstanding. And that builds confidence within a group. The next time he's put into that situation and players see him running onto the field, they'll be, this is great. We have a guy there that can do the job. And that's exactly what you want.
Birch, on Beelum, and this is very much something that I'm asking as someone who hasn't been involved in high intensity situations or dressing rooms like that, whereas you definitely have. But would it have been an important thing for Beelum or the coaches as well that Páirc Furlong saw out those 90 odd seconds to half time, so that if Finlay Beelum's coming on, he has 15 minutes to process everything and 15 minutes to get himself set to come out at the start of the second half, rather than togging straight off with 38 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock? Or is that completely overreading the situation?
No, look, it's obviously helpful. It's obviously helpful to have had that chance to process it, but not so much for being able to be ready to scrum. It's actually to be able to talk to Dan Sheehan, to be able to talk to Páirc Furlong and kind of get a feel for what they were trying to do, what Kitchoff was doing, what what Marks was doing, and take that on board as well, because obviously Tig and Sheehan, they had to experience that, in the game. Obviously you can do your video analysis, but you only really know, what it feels like and what angles they're really taking in it. So I think from that point of view, it was definitely beneficial. And I just thought, Donal's absolutely right. He gave away the first penalty, but Ireland just looked really composed and didn't really show any emotion. It was, poker face, next job, next scrum, next line of maul, etc. And even when all that pressure came, and obviously the game was in the balance, I'm not saying we were comfortable by any manner of means, but you didn't feel Ireland were panicking. They were able to, get down the field, get that penalty that gave them a bit of a cushion, and defended pretty well, because New Zealand, South Africa did come at them. They brought on Quagga Smith, who gave them another carrier. Willie LaRue gave them a second playmaker. Faf was back to his best. So they threw the kitchen sink at us. But yes, from a defensive point of view, I thought we looked reasonably composed. Apart obviously we conceded the score, but we weren't rattled. And look, that's the advantage of being at the Viva as well and having the home crowd, because at that stage the atmosphere was good, but I suppose the challenge now is to be able to do this in the World Cup, in a neutral venue.
Yeah, but it also helps Birch hugely. Just going back to the scrum, go back to Beelum. Like Connacht had been down in South Africa at the start of the year. They played against the Stormers. Yeah. To be fair to the Malherbe and Kitsoff feature regularly for the Stormers all throughout last season and indeed this season. Fellas like Etzebeth are only kind of feeding back into the South African system now. So it's a huge plus when you've actually been out there, you've faced them before, you know the little nuances, you know what they like to do. You have a lot more tape, you have a lot more kind of information on them. And it's like, we spoke about this a year and a half, 2 years ago, the benefits of the South African teams coming into the URC for us. And I think, that was a contributory factor without question in terms of the way Ireland dealt with the issues that have caused them problems before up front. So it will be the benefit to us in the long run.
Yeah, it's removed a bit of the mystique around South Africa, probably, isn't it?
Totally, because it doesn't matter who you are. The Bulls, look at the pack that the Bulls are able to throw. The Sharks, when the likes of Etzebeth and Saya Kolisi, Bombi and the Bonambi, they're all there. Ox and Che, they're all in the Sharks. I mean, it's phenomenal. Thomas Dutoit will be starting for the A team against Munster on tomorrow night. That is the level of physicality that you've been exposed to when you play against those sides, and it's a great learning curve for the younger players. So yeah, look, I mean, we're beginning to see the benefit of it now.
Birch, Fiji on Saturday, then team is going to be named tomorrow as it normally is. Picking up on some of the things during this week, you do get the feeling that Andy Farrell is actually going to make probably more changes than he normally would. Johnny Sexton, for example, didn't do media yesterday like he normally would. I think that's a pretty clear indication that he's going to be rested this weekend. Tadhg Furlong obviously picked up his little ankle injury on Saturday evening. You'd imagine they're going to rest him up and try have him ready for Australia. Conor Murray's injury means Craig Casey, you would imagine, is going to come in at the very least onto a bench. We're probably going to see quite a few more changes as well. Is it possible we see something like Farrell almost trying out what the World Cup second team could look like?
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be smart. I don't think Johnny would have played anyway, but apparently his leg was
got a good dead leg, after that.
Yeah, the big dead leg. So that would have made it easy. But I actually, I wouldn't be overly disappointed if Joey started against Australia as well. I think that could be a great opportunity to let him start, given the fact that, look, I'm sure Farrell, when he was thinking about South Africa and thinking about changes, I'd imagine his intention was for Joey to get longer than he got. I think he got 2 minutes at the end, but I totally understand how that unfolded with the game the way it was. You didn't want to take off Sexton, but I'd love to see him get a big chunk. Obviously, he might get 60, 70 this weekend against Fiji, and I think it's important to reward those players who are obviously. Farrell is brilliant at building a squad and a squad mentality, squad ethos. A great place to be, and even. I think he's got huge respect for his players and what they give, and they'll give it back to him. And I think this is an ideal week to do that. Doesn't mean Fiji are a walkover by any manner of means.
No.
They're actually becoming more structured and probably harder to beat. The discipline was poor against Scotland, but Vern Cotter is starting to put some structure around them. And they have phenomenal athletes, fellas who are playing some of the best clubs in the world. So it's not an easy match by any manner of means, but I do think this is a great chance to come out in November with everybody having felt they played a role in it, because he'll have to go back as strong as possible, maybe bar Sexton for Australia, just with a view to getting more depth in that position, but maybe Johnny will refuse to not play and Johnny will play, but I think it's a great chance to turn the team around, and maybe like Hugo Keenan might go again because he hadn't played for a while, but I would be looking at a good few changes. Yeah.
Anyone in particular you'd be hoping to see come in, or who you think will come in, Donal?
I thought it was interesting to see Jack Crowley being the water boy on Saturday in the Aviva. Funny, I mean, Jack is a very, I know him since his days in Bandon Grammar. Very confident young guy. Was very frustrated at the lack of opportunities up to 2 months ago, and all of a sudden, that emerging Ireland team seems to have sort of changed everything for him. With Kieran Frawley obviously got injured the other night, so I think there's a possibility Crowley could be on the bench. Joey Carberry has to start, so that'll be an interesting dynamic for me. The other one, interesting you mentioned full back, and Hugo Keenan has nailed on that jersey. Ever since Rob Kearney retired, I don't think anybody has got a sniff in the 15 jersey. Like, he's nailed on for the World Cup, but I just wonder, I accept that he needs game time and all that. I'd love to see someone like Mac Hansen get half an hour at full back, just to see what he can do. I mean, he's such a brilliant broken field runner. Maybe the last half hour of the match. I'd love to see something like that. I think it's obvious. Look, we saw Cian Healy and Finlay Bealham were put out to the press yesterday, so I think they'll be starting. I think Treadwell may well get a start. You look at the back row, I think Jack Conan and Timoney could well come in. Van der Fleer and Peter Amania could be rested. But it's you do have to be careful. Fiji are a different animal to what they were before. I mean, I looked at the side that played against Scotland. You see, obviously the Fijian Drua are now playing as an entity in Super Rugby. So you have a massive amount of this squad who are playing against quality opposition week in, week out. They have an identity within that group, which is obviously Fijian based. I think I looked at the starting team against Scotland. 5 of them are with the Drua. 4 of them play regularly in the Premiership in England. 5 of them are in the top 14. And the other one was Mata, the number 8 from Edinburgh, who's an outstanding player. And that's, I'm not sure, Bert, what's the story with Semi Radradra? Is he injured at the moment or what? Because he is in their squad.
Yeah, I think he's injured. I think he was injured he had a niggle for that game.
Yeah, but I mean, they do have quality players outside of that. So, I mean, you do have to be careful. But look, this is the type of thing, like, you've got to trust. Farrell has shown huge trust in the guys that he is in that sort of his base squad, as I'd call it, of 35. This is the time to reward the trust that they've shown and start them in these games. You know, is McCluskey going to be fit? Is Robbie Henshaw, do you want him to get a game before Australia? Jimmy O'Brien, do you want to give him another run in the centre? Or James Hume? Like, to be fair, we haven't spoke about the A game. I mean, that Ireland pack were beaten up so badly against New Zealand that fellas like Hume never got an opportunity. He was somebody who had stood out a mile last year. Maybe McCluskey and Hume, if McCluskey was fit, you could play that Ulster combination in midfield. Either way, everything that Farrell is doing is absolutely choreographed with the World Cup in mind. I mean, we spoke about, you know, the bravery of adding the Maori games to the New Zealand tour, but you'd also have it add in playing New Zealand the night before South Africa is one thing. Having the senior squad take ownership of them less than 24 hours before the match and be actively involved in the build-up, be in the coaching box, that shows to those players, yeah, we're taking ye seriously. But it puts a massive ownership and work rate on the Irish management. So, I mean, I think Andy Farrell has been outstanding. His desire, his work rate, his attention to detail. Look, I think he's learned, obviously, he was part of the England World Cup management setup that failed to get out of their pool. Probably the biggest disappointment in his coaching career. He was then part of the Irish setup, a major part with Joe Schmidt in Japan, where everybody has now put their hand up after the event and said, look, they didn't tweak the game properly in the year leading into the World Cup. So Farrell has that bank of knowledge, particularly in relation to a World Cup. And, you know, you often hear coaches saying you learn more in defeat than victory. But he's had 2 World Cups which wouldn't have ended in the way that he wanted. So I think he has taken every piece of the negative elements of those 2 tournaments, and he's putting that into the preparation for next year. If we fail in France next year, it won't be for want of preparation from Andy Farrell's point of view.
And you say obviously you learn more in defeat than in failure. There's a fair chance he learned a lot on Friday night at the RDS.
Yeah, I think there was. Look, I think for a lot of the young players on that side, a lot of them have been on a roller coaster ride. I mean, the provinces have done well. A lot of them went to South Africa. They won the 3 games down there. But this New Zealand team, it was a different animal in terms of the Maori team that you played down in New Zealand. They were also, and bear in mind the fact that New Zealand have lost a lot of games this year. A lot of those players were looking at an opportunity a year out from a World Cup. They're playing against an Ireland team that beat them in a series down under. The game was live back in New Zealand. You had a pair of halfbacks in Perinara and Damien McKenzie, who had 118 New Zealand caps between them. I mean, I saw McKenzie played out half for the Maoris against the Lions in Rotorua in 2017, the day Peter O'Mahony captained the Lions the week out from the first test. And it absolutely lashed down with rain. James Lowe was fullback for the Maoris the same night. McKenzie had a nightmare. Just the conditions and the quality of the Lions pack that day, he had a nightmare. And I thought, well, and New Zealand were experimenting at that time of having him as their third 10 or an option off the bench. It just didn't work that night. I'd say he couldn't believe his luck at the RDS Friday night. It was a magnificent evening. But look, unfortunately, Ireland were found badly wanting. The one thing, if you're not if you're not up for the physical battle in a game like that, you're going to be in trouble. And, you know, we spoke about that being a key element in the game against South Africa. I thought at the breakdown, Ireland were just blown away, and they never recovered from that. So, I mean, I felt sorry for Casey and Frawley at halfback. They were in trouble. One guy stood out for me. I thought your man Jamie Osborne, 13. He looked outstanding when he had opportunities early on. Physically, he's a big man. Bert, you'd know more about him than I would, but I have to say I was really impressed with him because I know he's had some exposure with Leinster, but obviously not a huge amount given the quality that's ahead of him. But I thought he was excellent.
Yeah, he's a big physical player. Came through the youth system, Naas Rugby Club. Got kind of fast tracked through the academy. Played for Leinster in his debut against Scarlet. So I remember he put in a big hit. He loves the physical side of it. I think that was the thing that stood out to me as well, Donal, is that even though he was up against it, he tried to leave a mark on the game, and I think that's probably. I think the backs in general, I excuse them because the forwards are beaten up. But I think there will be question marks. Sorry, not question marks because they're good players, but the forwards will regret because you know yourself, you can actually play well in a pack that are being beaten up sometimes because you know you just need to roll up your sleeves and be physical and work hard, and we probably didn't do that. So, but it's one performance. There's some of those youngsters have huge talent, and I don't think I'd imagine that when that fixture was scheduled, Ireland wouldn't have expected the All Blacks to come as strong, you know, as they did. But you know, if you take that game and that performance, and then Saturday against Wales, I know Wales were poor, but you know, the All Blacks in turmoil, they ended up winning the Rugby Championship in the end, right? Obviously, losing to Ireland and losing to Argentina at home is a black mark, but Jesus, in terms of physicality, they seem to have really stepped up, and you know. Things go quickly, but you'd certainly think if the All Blacks get the physicality right, they have the other parts of the game to go well in
Yeah, well, the fellow who stood out for me for them, because I know he played a bit with I think the Crusaders during Super Rugby. The guy, Damien Gardner, 6.
Yeah.
New Zealand have been struggling to replace Jerome Kaino since he retired. You know, you've had loads of guys have had Erika Uwoni was the kind of you Shannon Frizzell, Liam Squires. There was loads of them, but I thought this guy, he just bossed everything, and I thought his work rate was phenomenal. So I mean, I'd say he's a guy we might see a little bit more a year out from a World Cup. I'd be surprised if he doesn't make the breakthrough.
On the Irish side of things, like you mentioned, the forwards. If we're picking at one person, unfortunately, it turned out to be a pretty damaging night for Gavin Coombs, who just seemed to get hit backwards every time he got the ball. It was almost as if he played 2 decent games against the Maori during the summer, and it was almost as if his card was marked from the start of the game. And unfortunately for him, it's come at a cost because he's out of the senior squad now this week, and Max Deegan is promoted from the A group into you know that last remaining back row spot in the senior squad.
Yeah, look, I think, Coombs, we all know what an explosive athlete he is, but I think he's got to learn. Most of his work is done in the opposition 22. That's where you see him most. There's more to rugby than that. I think his work rate, if he wants to play at international level, he has to get on the ball more, and he also his work rate off the ball when the opposition have it. I mean, you don't see him make him, like, given the physicality that he has, given the raw power. He's not a guy who's been manufactured in a gym. He's just a naturally big man. You'd love to see him smashing fellas when they have the ball, driving fellas back in dominant tackles. And I think for him to raise his game to the next level, that's what he has to do. I mean, I would tell him, look, go away and watch the performance of that fella Gardner. Look at his work rate on both sides of the ball. That is what you've got to work towards. In some respects, do you know what? I'm kind of happy, I suppose, maybe from a Munster perspective, because they're short and big men, but he'll have to front up in that South African game tomorrow night, because South Africa have a huge forward unit out there, with Munster with so many injuries in the second row. I don't know, I've heard nothing about their team, but I wouldn't be surprised if he might be thrown into action in the second row. And in terms of if you want a place in the World Cup, that mightn't be a bad thing for him either, because you know, for a guy on a bench, if you can cover back row and second row, it just adds to your options from a squad perspective when you're heading to a World Cup. So listen, I have a lot of time for Gavin Coombs, but there's times when you'd love to just catch him by the throat and shake him and say, come on, there's more in you, you know, because he has it. There's no doubt about that.
Down to the dressing room with you tomorrow night, Páirc Uí Chaoimh, Donal. You know,
Exactly,
yeah.
10 minutes before
get in there, get them going.
Well, speaking of, we'll move on to that Munster and South Africa game now, because at the time of recording this, we don't know what the teams are going. Well, we don't know what the Munster team is going to be. It'll be named a little bit later on today. But just in general, before we talk about the actual match itself, Donald, it's just a fantastic occasion. Like 41,000 plus sellout. As I saw one of my colleagues yesterday, Tony Tighe, mentioned the highest attendance ever for a rugby game in Munster. I would say more people claim to have been at the All Blacks match in 1978. But
there was only 12,000 there. I was there myself. I stood on the terraces that day as a
one
young
of the
student.
70,000.
I'm one of the 12,210 who have the tickets. No, listen, there's an incredible buzz around this game. 41,400 tickets sold in 3 days, which is incredible. I've never seen demand for tickets like it. I mean, there was a time when Ireland would play or Munster would play where my phone would be hopping all the time, people looking for tickets. You know, that hasn't happened in recent years, but it's happened this time. It is a sellout, and I've come across numerous people still scrambling for tickets. And here we are now, just over 24 hours out of the game, and the tickets aren't to be had. The only little worry I have, last night was beautiful evening down here. It's lovely today. Tomorrow the weather isn't great. I just want this to be a fantastic occasion, a fantastic spectacle. Páirc Uí Chaoimh, I mean, it's a special place for Cork people. I mean, I grew up in a GA background. I never played rugby until I went to secondary school. I remember I'm old enough to have seen the 3 incarnations. I mean, Páirc Uí Chaoimh used to be the athletic grounds. I remember my father bringing me there as an 8 or a 9-year-old for Cork Kerry matches, for county hurling championships between the Glen and the Bars. I remember one day, Cork, my father was a Kerry man, Cork playing Kerry down in the park, and it was a horrible place. It was an old sort of corrugated iron. You had the concrete seats, and Mick O'Dwyer was playing for Kerry. And there was 2 Kerry fellas, Mick Gleeson and Seamus Looney, Lord rest of them, were sent off. One for Cork, one for Kerry, and the 2 of them had to walk down the sideline, and the crowd were baying for blood, and they were booing this guy Mick Gleeson, who'd been sent off for Kerry. I think I was 8, and next to my father jumped up next to me and he started clapping. Well done, Mick Gleeson, clapping furiously. Jesus, I thought we were going to be killed. No, I didn't realise as an 8-year-old that my father was actually an Irish heavyweight boxing champion. He had boxed for Ireland, and I'm sure a lot of the people around him knew that. So I was in safer hands than I thought. But you know, I was there. That was in the old athletic grounds. I was the famous day, the first reincarnation. When Páirc Uí Chaoimh came along, Cork played Kerry in a Munster football final. The crowds were so big that the gates were ripped off the hinges. The crowds ended up around the sitting on the sidelines. In fact, it was a draw, and they played again. So I mean, it's and I was, you know, the new stadium where we had all hoped that had been earmarked for a quarter-final of the Rugby World Cup, which obviously we didn't get the World Cup. But I was there the Liam Miller Day, which was another kind of you know, a poignant day in many ways, but an incredible day in that, again, sold out. Manchester United there in raid. So it's symbolic. I mean, we like to think in Cork that we're, you know, we've a massive interest in all sports. You know, we've been successful in most of them, or so we like to think. So it's a huge day from that point of view. Look, it's no secret there's been a bit of a disconnect between it. It's as if Limerick have taken over Munster rugby. I know there's a huge amount of Cork people that I meet who just don't go to Limerick anymore. They don't feel part of the Munster journey anymore. So for all kinds of reasons, I think having this game down here is huge. The only worry I have is that Munster are so depleted. I only saw this morning the fact that John Ryan has been released to play for the Barbarians. No, playing against South Africa, the one thing you want is somebody to anchor the scrum at tight head. So, but look, that's the one thing I'd hate is if we're not competitive. Do you know what I mean? You got to get the crowd into the game. You got to make an occasion of it. So therefore, we have a history down here against the odds of standing up against touring teams, and that's part of our tradition, and that's something that this group has to stand up and be part of. So, given all the injuries they have, I just have this slight little niggle worry, maybe.
Yeah, and Bernard, like on the actual match itself, like as great as the occasion, as big as a day as it's going to be, given the injury situation and the run of form and the struggles with results. If you were Graham Roundtree now, would you be looking at this fixture going, God, I need this like a hole in the head? Or is it just the kind of pick me up the team would need? Like what would you be thinking as a coach?
No, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, and as Donal said, you got to tap into the legacy of Munster of old against touring teams, performing, overperforming, a lot of times, and to go to Páirc Uí Chaoimh, which is, I just think it's a phenomenal. I was one of the rugby players looking up playing Croke Park, and as from a GA background myself, that was special. And look, I know things may open up in the future, but potentially Munster might be back in Páirc Uí Chaoimh for a long time, or this group of players might never play there again. So they have to get excited by it. Whoever comes in, and they will, it will be a case of mixed match because of injuries, because of fellas away with Ireland. But wow, like what an opportunity! And the Springbok A team are very strong. You know what I mean? We mentioned Donal mentioned Thomas Dutoit. But Johan Goosen is playing at 10. Cornel Hendricks, Fassi the fullback is exciting. Henko van Wyk. Jason Jenkins, yeah, Henko van Wyk is a 13 that a lot of people felt should have started ahead of
Jesse Creel.
Creel, who actually had a very good game in fairness, but wasn't on form. But he's a youngster who's been going really well for the Lions. So I think from a Graham Roundtree point of view, obviously the risk is not being competitive and maybe denting confidence. But I think if they can fire a few shots, be competitive, the good it'll do this team and this squad is actually worth the risk.
Donal, how do you feel?
I think exactly that. I mean, if they can fire a few shots, all it needs to be is a big tackle or a scrum penalty or a maul where they can drive the Springboks back. The place will go berserk. I mean, I haven't seen an interest in a game like this for a long time. People are coming down, Munster people that I know coming down from Dublin, staying the night. It's incredible. There's a lot of corporate activity around it that we just haven't seen. I know some fella in the Munster branch was giving out that he says you're all talking about Cork. There was only 4,500 turned up in Musgrave Park for the Munster Zebra game. I mean, come on, like we get Zebra and we get the Dragons down here. You go back, you look at the 20s when they come to Musgrave Park. You look at the women's team when they come down and play in the Six Nations. Give us something to turn up for and to fight for, and you'll see a reaction. And I think, you'll see that tomorrow night. There is, it's a very knowledgeable crowd. People know that Munster are under strength. They know that their backs are to the wall. But that's the DNA of Munster. That was the old Anthony Foley, the chip on the shoulder. We got to have a cause. Well, they have a cause tomorrow, because if they don't get it right, then they could be in serious trouble. And I think the crowd will recognise that. As I say, I just hope weather-wise that it's not a washout, that we get a decent evening, and that Munster, in terms of they do a good job in sort of generating the atmosphere around the game and all that. But look, I can't wait. For me, it'll be the highlight of the November series.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it as well. Can't wait to head down. Bernard, are you going?
No tickets. So I'll be on to Donal this afternoon.
Too late.
Keep eyes and ears open.
I beg to for training, but I'll be. I can't wait to watch it. So I think it's brilliant. It's brilliant to see being played there, and hopefully it's a start in the future. I'd love to see Munster get into a big European game, and that needs a bigger crowd and being able to play there. It'd be brilliant for Cork and Cork rugby and that part of Munster.
Yeah, potential to open up an enormous amount of doors in the future. Fellas, we'll leave it there for this evening. Munster against South Africa, as we say, tomorrow evening, 8:00. Ireland against Fiji on Saturday afternoon at 1
half 7 tomorrow night.
I thought it was 8:00.
No, I think it's 7:30.
All right.
It is.
Well, I'll have to leave another couple of hours.
No. All I know is I have to be down there from 4:00. So I think it's 7:30.
Well, listen, we'll leave it there for this week. There's those 2 matches coming up in the next few days, and we'll be back same time again next week in the RTÉ Rugby podcast. Donal, Birch, thanks a million.
Cheers,
guys.